In March of 2008, a biology professor at the University of Alabama by the name of Amy Bishop was in her office organizing her desk and going through her mail before it was time to leave for her next class. As Amy was rummaging through her mail, she picked up one specific envelope and opened it. Amy didn't know it at the time, but the letter that was contained within this one envelope was about to set in motion a chain of events that would eventually leave 3 people dead and 3 more fighting for their lives. On December 6, 1986, 21-year-old Amanda Bishop was living with her parents and her brother in Braintree, Massachusetts. 1 year earlier, in 1985, the family home had been broken into, and because of this, Amy's father purchased a shotgun and then proceeded to show the entire family, including Amy, how to load it in an effort to try to keep everybody safe. But on this day, December 6th of 1986, so a full year after the break-in, Amy suddenly found herself feeling scared inside the house. She just had a bad feeling, and it reminded her of when the house had been broken into before. Amy went over to where her dad kept the shotgun and loaded it. But as time went on, Amy realized that there was nothing to worry about. Nobody was trying to break into the house, and so she didn't really need the shotgun anymore. The problem was, though, that Amy did not know how to unload the shotgun. This wasn't a big deal, though, because Amy's 18-year-old brother Seth had just returned home. Amy took the shotgun over to Seth so that he could unload it for her, and as Amy went to hand the shotgun over to Seth, suddenly, Amy's ears were struck by this loud, sharp blast that was so powerful that she could somehow feel it ripple through her body. This noise and this sensation only lasted for a quick second, but when it was over, Amy quickly realized that somehow the gun had fired, and Seth had been shot in the chest at close range. Seth was quickly rushed to the hospital to try to save his life, but his injuries were just too severe, and he died shortly after arriving at the hospital. When the police arrived at their house to investigate this shooting, Amy's mother, Judy Bishop, told the police that she had actually witnessed the shooting, like she was in the room when it happened, and she explained to the officers that this shooting was nothing more than a tragic accident. But Judy didn't actually witness the shooting, and based on her statement, the police did not investigate any further, simply taking her word for it. And just like that, the investigation had ended as quickly as it had started. The death was ruled an accident, and because of that, no charges were filed. But what nobody could have ever known was that ruling this death as an accident ultimately solidified that certain details of Seth Bishop's death that were known by a small group of people would remain hidden for almost 25 years. Amy Bishop was born on April 24, 1965, in Iowa City, Iowa. Her parents were Sam and Judy Bishop, and the young family made their home in Braintree, Massachusetts, where Sam and Judy had another child, a son, who they named Seth in 1968. Growing up, Amy was a quiet and reserved child. She had amazing talent and was pretty much excellent at everything she did. But she had a problem. She didn't feel like her level of excellence that she knew she had brought her the attention she deserved. The problem was that her brother Seth was the only person in the entire world that she had ever met who could outperform her at every single thing she did. If Amy excelled in academics, then Seth did even better. If Amy was stellar at the violin, then Seth was a master of the violin. Amy's resentment of her brother grew stronger and stronger over time, and when they attended high school together, it got even worse because in high school, all of the students there would refer to Amy as the weird girl. But Seth, on the other hand, got along with everyone. In fact, he was incredibly popular, and it became worse when he graduated from high school and enrolled in the Northeastern University where his father worked, because Amy was already a student there. No matter how much Amy accomplished in the sciences, which was her focus of study, in Amy's mind, Seth always seemed to cast a shadow over her, and Amy believed that even her own parents actually liked Seth more than they liked her. Amy joined the Dungeons and Dragons Club at the university, which did not help boost her popularity much at all, because if you don't already know, Dungeons and Dragons is a role-playing game that attracts a diverse range of people. But there is a very strong stereotype that the type of people who play Dungeons and Dragons are mainly those who do not typically run with the popular crowd. This did not stop Amy though, and while she was participating in this club, she met a man by the name of Jimmy Anderson. Amy completely hated the name Jimmy and absolutely refused to call him by his given name. Instead, she called him James. She even did this in front of his own parents when she met them after they had started dating. It appeared that Amy hated the name Jimmy because it lacked the level of sophistication that she was intending to rise to, and this prompted her to insist on calling him James at all times. It didn't take long before James and Amy were married, and most people found it incredibly strange that the wedding took place in the same church where Amy's brother Seth had his funeral service 3 years earlier. Amy also decided that she did not want to use James's last name, which was Anderson. Instead, she insisted that she keep her own last name because she wanted the notoriety attached to the bishop name when it came time that she could call herself a doctor. Shortly following her marriage, Amy wrote an honors thesis that grabbed the interest of recruiters from Harvard University, ultimately leading to her enrollment in their PhD program in genetics. It should not come as a surprise by now, but Harvard quickly became a significant, all-consuming aspect of Amy's identity. Amy wanted the attention so bad that almost immediately after she started attending Harvard, she began to introduce herself to everyone as Dr. Amy Bishop, Harvard educated. Over the next 4 years, James and Amy had 3 daughters together, while Amy continued pushing forward towards obtaining her doctorate. And although she would have people believe otherwise, she actually struggled quite a bit during her time at Harvard, and it continued that way for her all the way up until the day she was finally handed her PhD. But this too was overshadowed. After Amy graduated, rumors had started circulating amongst the faculty that the thesis Amy had submitted was so abysmal and so subpar that she should have never received her doctorate in the first place. Amy was so furious about these rumors and what people were saying, but despite the gossip, Amy had to let it go. She had to move on to a position within a postgraduate research fellowship. Amy's fellowship was supposed to be a positive turning point in her career, but once again, Amy's personality and poor attitude towards her coworkers just ended up ruining any chances she had of being part of a productive team at the Harvard Medical Center. Dr. Paul Rosenberg, who was her supervisor, was constantly having to deal with ongoing conflicts between Amy and her coworkers, and tensions in the office escalated when she expressed how upset she was over his unwillingness to provide a positive review of her doctoral thesis. Instead, Dr. Paul Rosenberg actually issued a negative review of her work in the lab. He did not believe that she was doing a very good job at all. He knew she had potential to be a great member of the team, but unfortunately, Amy was not willing to work productively with anybody. And so, eventually, Dr. Rosenberg was able to convince Amy that it was time for her to resign from the fellowship. She did not take this lightly, and she grudgingly gathered up her things from her workspace and left her position within the fellowship. Not long after Amy's resignation, on December 19, 1993, Dr. Rosenberg and his wife Harriet Moss arrived home. They walked up to their front porch, and there they found a white cardboard box waiting for them, sitting right in front of their front door. These were the days when the Unabomber was active, and so Dr. Rosenberg didn't take any chances with this strange package. Very carefully and very cautiously, he opened the box. Peeking inside, he could not believe what he was looking at. Inside the box was an actual bomb. Luckily for Dr. Rosenberg and his wife, it did not detonate, and when the bomb squad came in to defuse it, They confirmed that this was not the work of the Unabomber. Dr. Rosenberg could only think of one person who might want to harm him, and that person was Amy Bishop. An investigation into Amy Bishop found that many people who had worked with her were completely and totally terrified of her. She had been in major altercations with others in the lab, accusing them of trying to take credit for her work and other such attacks on her credibility. Amy absolutely refused to allow anyone to cast a shadow on any of her accomplishments the way her brother Seth had before he died. The evidence found during the police investigation as a result of this bomb was not enough to charge Amy or her husband with a crime. But, despite that, they remained the only possible suspects in the case. And once again, Amy was in the clear for yet another crime that people fully believed she was guilty of committing. Amy continued on for a while, working in research at various hospitals, but because of her terrible, self-righteous attitude, she would regularly be let go from any position she had somehow managed to get. It was just impossible to work with her. But in 2003, things started to look up for Amy, because Amy was offered a position at the University of Alabama as an associate professor of biology. It was also during this time that Amy and James had started building an automated cell incubator. This was essentially an electric petri dish. They believed that this device would revolutionize how things were done in the scientific community. This position that Amy had just moved into at the university was a huge opportunity for her because, as an associate professor, Amy would be able to gain tenure. Academic tenure is a way to appoint a professor to an academic position indefinitely. And this also means that if Amy achieved tenure, she could only be fired under extraordinary circumstances. But in order for Amy to gain tenure, she was required to publish a certain number of research papers within a certain time frame. For some reason, Amy's focus was not on the research papers. Instead, she was spending most of her free time working on the electric petri dish until it was finished. The petri dish was initially successful, with the university's president believing it would change the way biological and medical research was conducted, not to mention that the invention brought more than $1 million worth of research grants into the university. And Amy loved every single minute of it, as she soaked up the attention like a sponge, finally feeling like she was receiving the attention she deserved. But her success came at a cost. Amy had only published 3 articles over the 5 years she had been at the university, and not a single one of them appeared in any major publications. It was even said that one of the publications would publish anything, and to add insult to injury, after the initial excitement over the electric petri dish subsided, many scientists actually came out to criticize the idea, saying it was expensive and completely unnecessary. And it was around this time, while her invention was being criticized, that Amy was blindsided by a bunch of reviews that were made on a website called ratemyprofessor.com. Essentially, on this website, students are able to post an honest review of what they think of their professor's teaching skills. On this website, in full view for everyone to see, Amy Bishop was harshly criticized for her teaching style. Her students posted things about how dissatisfied they were with her as their teacher, describing her as arrogant and uninterested in providing any feedback to her students. The students disliked Amy so much that they actually initiated a petition to have her removed from the classroom as a professor. And this petition was hand-delivered to Dr. Gopi Padilla, who was the head of the Biological Sciences program. Dr. Gopi Padilla dismissed the petition immediately, though, and nothing more came of that. Amy had gone 3 years without having any research papers published, which was working against her plans of gaining a tenure at the university. But finally, Amy dug deep and eventually had 2 separate articles written in the Journal of Neurochemistry. After those 2 papers were published, Amy published a 3rd paper in the International Journal of General Medicine, which was not a prestigious journal, and authors could actually pay to have their work published in it. And to make this particular paper even more strange, for some reason, and nobody knows why, Amy listed the authors of this paper as herself, her husband, and their 3 daughters. Finally, after 5 full years of working as an associate professor at the University of Alabama, the time finally came and Amy was able to apply for academic tenure. The tenure process took a long time and heavily involved multiple reviews just to basically guarantee as much as possible that she was the right fit for the university. Amy waited and waited for the confirmation of the tenure that she was absolutely positive she would get, since she was a graduate of Harvard. But, to Amy's complete surprise, when she opened that letter in her office that day, she learned that her tenure had been denied. And this meant that Amy no longer had a job at the University of Alabama. Amy was completely outraged. She filed appeals as well as an unbelievable claim of gender discrimination, specifically pointing her finger at a professor who had said that Amy was absolutely crazy. That professor was later given the opportunity to retract his statement, but in response, he turned around and did the complete opposite. He plainly stated, loud and clear, that Amy had a pattern of erratic behavior and was out of touch with reality. Ultimately, in the end, Amy's appeal was denied, and she had no other options left. On February 12th of 2010, after she finished teaching her last class for the morning, Amy hopped into her car and drove home. There, she had lunch with her husband, and then, once they were finished eating, she asked James to give her a ride back to the university so that she could attend a faculty meeting. There was really no reason for her to be at this meeting, seeing as how her employment with the university was ending. But Amy's level of arrogance demanded that she went anyway. Despite the meeting's mundane and drawn-out schedule, Amy sat silently for almost 40 minutes listening to the faculty staff talk to one another all around her. But when the small hand of the clock clicked over to 3:37 p.m., without saying anything, and without interrupting anyone, Amy reached into her bag and pulled out a Ruger P85 9mm semi-automatic pistol and immediately began shooting faculty members sitting around the table, starting with those closest to her and then working her way around the table. One by one, in succession, Amy relentlessly pulled the trigger, shooting multiple colleagues who were completely caught off guard. Amy was specifically aiming for their chest and their head in order to inflict the most damage to her victims. Some of them managed to get out of the room, but Dr. Deborah Moriarty, a lady who actually liked Amy and even went so far as to call her a friend, begged Amy not to kill her. But Amy wasn't listening. She pointed the gun at Dr. Moriarty's head and pulled the trigger, which was followed by a click sound. The gun had jammed, giving Dr. Moriarty a chance to escape the room. She ran for the door and quickly made her escape. Amy didn't bother chasing her, and she didn't wait around either. As soon as Dr. Moriarty was out of the room, Amy turned and left too. She ran down a flight of stairs where she slipped into a bathroom and disposed of the gun and a jacket in a garbage can. And then, when she left the bathroom, walking down the hall, she asked a student she'd seen if she could borrow their phone. The student handed their phone over to Amy, who then casually called her husband to ask him to come pick her up from the school. It did not take long at all for the SWAT team to descend upon the university. When they got there, they immediately evacuated the building, and emergency medical staff began to treat the injured faculty members who had been shot point blank by Amy Bishop. Police found the discarded gun and jacket in the bathroom, and Amy was eventually arrested as she was sneaking out of the building to go meet up with her husband. Sadly, Dr. Gopi Padilla, along with 2 other doctors, died at the scene, and 3 other faculty members were injured, but they would later recover. During the course of the investigation of Amy, the matter of Amy's brother Seth came to the surface. Strangely, after the officer who had investigated the shooting death of Seth had passed away in the early 1990s, his family was going through his belongings. And it was during this time that Seth's case file was found inside the officer's house. All of this seemed strange to the investigators, and based on Amy's most recent mass shooting event, they began to dig a little deeper to the death of Seth, and what they discovered is believed to be a 25-year-old conspiracy that was meant to cover up a murder. For one thing, Amy's mother, Judy, stated that she was home during the time of the shooting, but looking into the timing of her activities throughout that day, it was determined that it was almost impossible for her to have been home when Seth was shot. They also noted that when Amy went and got the shotgun, she had taken out 4 shotgun shells, not one like she implied. Further to this, Amy had actually fired one of the shells in her room. Then, before leaving her room, she reloaded the shotgun and went to get Seth's help to unload it. And that was when he was shot. Amy then pumped the shotgun to remove the shell and engaged the 3rd shell in the chamber. The 4th shell remained in her pocket. After Seth was shot, Amy actually left the house with the shotgun in hand and ran over to a nearby car dealership. Once she was at the dealership, at gunpoint, she demanded that they give her a car because she planned on making a getaway. This whole situation at the dealership was neutralized when a police officer apprehended Amy and just brought her back to her house. Amy's actions at the dealership were significant because one of the photos that was still tucked away in the long-lost police file showed the cover of a magazine. And that particular issue of that magazine contained a story about how an actor's parents had been murdered with a shotgun. And then the attacker used the shotgun to steal a getaway car. These 25-year-old secrets were now fully out in the open, and the entire town of Huntsville was outraged by the details of the cover-up of Seth Bishop's murder and realizing that if Amy had been held responsible for her first murder way back in 1986, there was a pretty good chance she would have not had the opportunity to shoot 6 people at the university in 2010. On September 24th of 2012, Amy Bishop pled guilty to 1 count of capital murder and 3 counts of attempted murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The state of Massachusetts decided not to seek extradition in order to try Amy for Seth's murder, since they knew she would never be released from prison in Alabama. So, that's going to wrap it up for this story. Remember to subscribe and show your support by hitting that like button. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and I will see you again later.